I saw it myself. That moment when the air in the observation deck turned to liquid gold. Kalen was on his knees, his chest a jagged mess of scorched armor and raw heat. And Harry, she didn't just hold him. She became him. I remember the way the sanguine tether pulsed a frantic, glowing ribbon of light that didn't just bridge the gap between their skin, but fused their very atoms. Her fingers were buried in his hair, pulling his forehead against hers. And for a second, I swear I couldn't tell where the human ended and the Xylos began. Their heartbeats were slamming against the deck plates like a single drum. But look, it didn't start with that kind of fire. It started with the cold, sterile hum of the ship, the ether's reach. I was there for the whole ceasefire, watching Kalen stand like a statue at the edge of the glass. He was a soldier through and through, stiff shoulders, eyes constantly scanning the deep space for a threat that hadn't arrived yet. And Hiri? She was the hegemony's jewel. All sharp angles, standing just a few feet away. They were worlds apart even when breathing the same air. They weren't supposed to touch. That was the rule. A human guard and a Xylos royalite was a miracle. They were even in the same sector without pulling triggers. But I noticed things. I saw the way his hand would twitch toward his holster whenever she moved too quickly. I saw how she'd catch his reflection in the viewport, her gaze lingering on the lines of fatigue around his eyes. The ship felt small back then. The smell of ozone was thick, and the vibration of the engines under our feet seemed to sync up with the unspoken tension in that room. I remember one night, the stars were particularly bright outside the glass. Kalen was adjusting a hologram display, and his hand brushed against hers. Just for a second, it was like an electric spark jumped between them. He pulled back so fast you'd think he'd been burned, but Hiri didn't move. She just watched him, her breathing a little shallow, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something that the peace treaty wouldn't allow. Then the siren screamed. It wasn't a malfunction. I heard the hiss of the breach before the first bolt even fired. Rogue assassins. They moved like flickers of light across the deck. Kalen didn't hesitate. Not for a heartbeat. He threw himself across the space between them with a ferocity I'll never forget. I remember his boot slamming against the metal as he shoved Hiri behind a terminal. And then, the blast. It was a lethal surge of energy, a blinding white arc meant to end a lineage. He took it all. The impact threw him back, and I watched the light start to fade from his eyes as he hit the floor. Hiri was there in an instant. She didn't care about the protocol anymore. She didn't care about the war or the generals. She knelt in the middle of the chaos, her hands trembling as she reached for the forbidden device at her hip. The sanguine tether. I wanted to tell her to stop, but the way she looked at him, it was like he was the only thing left in the whole galaxy. I saw it myself. The way the light didn't just surround them, it consumed them. The sanguine tether wasn't some clean, clinical piece of tech. It was raw and violent. When Hiri pressed that glowing device into the ruin of Kalen's chest, I heard a sound like a lightning strike trapped in a jar. His back arched so hard I thought his spine might snap, and his eyes, they went wide, turning from that human blue to a shimmering, iridescent gold. I remember the smell of ozone and burnt copper filling the deck, thick enough to choke on. But Hiri didn't pull away. She leaned into the heat, her own skin beginning to ripple with the same geometric patterns that marked her royal bloodline. Truth is, I don't think they even noticed me, standing there by the blast doors. They were in their own world, a private hell of shifting cells and merging nerves. I saw the electric spark of her skin meeting his scorched armor. And then the armor just gave way. It melted into the light. Her fingers were locked around his wrists, and I could see the pulse in her neck jumping in perfect time with the thud of his struggling heart. It was a frantic, desperate rhythm. I stood there, my own hand shaking, watching the first interspecies hybrid being forged in a fire that should have killed them both. I remember the way the vibration of the ship seemed to change then. The engines were still humming, but there was this new resonance, a low frequency that made the deck plates under my boots feel alive. Keelan's breathing hitched, a jagged, painful sound, and then it smoothed out. It was like he was finally catching his breath after a lifetime of drowning. He reached up, his hand trembling as he touched her cheek. I saw the stinging behind her eyes, the way she squeezed them shut as the link solidified. She wasn't just saving his life, she was giving him half of hers, and he was giving her everything he had left. Look, I've seen a lot of things in the deep black of space, but I've never seen a victory like that. When the light finally died down, they didn't fall apart. They stayed locked together, foreheads pressed close, breathing the same air. The assassins were gone, the breach was sealed, and the ceasefire had turned into something permanent, something written in their very DNA. I saw Kalen look down at his hands, watching the faint glow beneath his skin settle into a steady, calm pulse. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, and she wasn't just a monarch. They were the bridge. I don't know, maybe some people would call it a tragedy, being bound like that, never having a private thought or a lone heartbeat ever again. But I saw the way he looked at her when he finally stood up. There was no pain left in him, just this absolute, unshakable clarity. He became the first Viridian guard that day, not because of a promotion, but because he was the only soul in the galaxy who truly knew what it felt like to be the enemy. They walked off that deck hand in hand, and for the first time in 3 generations, the ship was actually peaceful. I just stood there in the quiet, watching the stars, knowing I'd just seen the end of the war and the beginning of something much, much bigger. Would you like me to generate a cinematic image of the moment the sanguine tether fused their 2 souls together?